The fall of the Tokugawa Shogunate in 1868 ushered in the age of Imperial Japan in what is known as the Meiji Restoration. For almost 80 years, the Japanese Empire would change the life of many within Japan's borders and beyond, until its fall at the end of the Second World War. One of the many things that the Imperial Age altered was the love, sex, and marriage behaviors of the Japanese people. The Meiji Restoration brought about a conservative, nationalist, and eugenicist view of the world that emphasized collective obligation in all things. The family was a microcosm of the nation, and loyalty to it became the most important of virtues. Today, on A Day in History, we explore lovemaking and marriage in this changing Imperial Japan. If you enjoy videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to support us and keep updated on future content. Before we can understand love and marriage in Imperial Japan, we must first understand the importance of the ie. The ie is the name for the Japanese family system. It refers to the combination of blood relatives, property, reputation, ancestors, and future generations that make up the family. To be part of the ie is to be part of a single shared unit. In the age of Imperial Japan, the ie was the main legal building block of society, and property belonged to the ie as a whole, not to individual members. All members had to sacrifice their interests for those of the ie as a whole. Members of the ie had a duty to maintain its dignity and prosperity by acting properly and following the complex hierarchies of family life. They also had a duty to pay respect to their ancestors and an obligation to provide children to continue their ie and maintain its property so it could be passed down to them. As one haiku put it, each member of the ie was expected to live and die after one another, cultivating the rice field in turn. The ie of the imperial period was especially patriarchal, with men acting as the heads of the household and women expected to be obedient to every man. The wife obeyed her husband, the daughter obeyed her father, the sister obeyed her brother, and so on. Filial piety, the respect owed from children to their parents, was a vital part of the power dynamics of the ie. The ie had been the foundation of Japanese social structure for generations, and it gained increased importance during the imperial period as the imperial government emphasized tradition, stability, and order among the Japanese populace. Love, sex, and marriage were all important to the ie. The addition of new members through marriage or childbirth was understandably of great concern. In Imperial Japan, the ie became increasingly influential over the love lives of all its members. It might be wrong to apply a Western idea of love to Japan. Romantic love was not a priority for most Japanese people. Marriage and sexual gratification were one thing, but finding a soulmate was not something that Japanese society placed much value on. Of course, people did fall in love as we would understand it, but it was not something people would expect or even plan to happen. Love matches were seen as an unstable basis to build a relationship on. As one saying went, those that came together in passion stay together in tears. Finding a spouse in early Imperial Japan was not a simple matter. Much of Japanese society was sex-segregated in places like schools, leisure activities, and workplaces. Fraternization in the workplace was frowned upon and could be grounds for dismissal. In 1904, one Christian went as far as to say there was no such thing as courtship in Japan, although this is overstating it. One place where men and women could meet was in their villages, and this is how most pre- and early imperial couples met. Sometimes the marriages would be arranged, but sometimes a young couple would come together themselves. One courtship custom was known as yobai. Yobai was a name for when a budding young couple would secretly meet at night, often for sex, in the hopes of leading to a marriage. This usually meant the man visiting the woman at her house. It might be easy to imagine the girl's outraged parents stumbling across the midnight rendezvous, but actually, parents often encouraged this behavior. Some parents would even let their daughters sleep closer to doors and windows so that these meetings would be easier. From the parents' perspective, if the meetings resulted in a pregnancy, it all but ensured that a marriage would follow. A significant number of marriages occurred this way, with a mix of personal choice from the couple and the approval of the parents. However, the power balance shifted dramatically over the imperial period, away from personal choice and towards arranged marriages chosen for the benefit of the ie. In contrast to commoners, the samurai class of Japan had long practiced arranged marriages, much like other elite families around the world. Marriage was a political, social, and economic tool rather than a romantic endeavor. These ideas spread into the masses throughout the imperial era, encouraged by the new regime. Government schools began to push samurai values onto commoners, and government policy declared the ie as the basic legal building block of Japan. Soon, arranged marriages for the benefit of the family were rapidly replacing the freer choice enjoyed by commoners in pre-imperial Japan. The yobai tradition was slowly ostracized. Love in general started to be seen as an especially dangerous indulgence, or even a weakness. In the same way that someone ruled by anger or despair was behaving inappropriately, so was the person who made choices out of romantic love. In this changing climate, some couples were forced to elope instead, but this was frowned upon as disrespectful and stupid. Marriage in Imperial Japan soon became the concern of the ie above all. By the beginning of the 20th century, most marriages were arranged ones, and up to 70% of Japanese marriages were arranged by the 1930s and 40s. The parents took the lead role in selecting marriages, often using a third party to negotiate with the parents of a potential spouse to decide on the union. In early Meiji, girls married in their mid to late teens, but by the early 1900s, the average marriage age had risen to 23 and was still climbing. Men had always tended to be older than their brides, but the average age of marriage for men also rose in this period. However, it was still rare for a woman to be unmarried past the age of 25, or for a man to be single past 30. When the potential spouses were of marriageable age, a mie or amie was held. Mie literally translates to look meet, and was a formal occasion where the spouses and their families met. This was often the first time that spouses would see each other, but they were not the only people sizing up the match. This was a vital opportunity for the parents to judge a new member of the family. If the first meeting was successful, the couple might have additional meetings arranged before a marriage was agreed upon. However, the approval of the couples was not always necessary. It was considered improper for a son, or especially a daughter, to criticize their parents' choice of spouse. So inevitably, many people ended up in marriages that they weren't happy with. In fact, it was said that some couples didn't even get the chance to speak to each other at their mie. In the end, it was the demands of the ie, not any sense of love among the couple, that decided a marriage. Initially, marriage ceremonies did not come with the pomp and ceremony of modern unions. Often there would be no ceremony at all, and the woman would simply move into the man's house. Brides would have come with a dowry. In some upper-class families, ceremonial items like dresses and utensils became part of a ceremony and of the dowry, but these were beyond the means of regular people. In the early 20th century, more elaborate customs took hold among the elites. The wedding of Prince Yoshihito and Kojo Sadako in 1900 popularized the idea of a traditional Shinto wedding, although the idea of a Shinto wedding was not known before the late 19th century. Again, these ceremonies were beyond the means of the average Japanese couple, but a Shinto wedding became popular among city-dwelling elites. These weddings were family affairs conducted by a Shinto priest at a shrine and involved the couple drinking from shared cups and reciting their vows before an audience, much like modern ceremonies in Japan. With their marriages arranged and ceremonies completed or skipped, married life began. Married life reflected the deeply held values of filial piety and female submissiveness that dominated Imperial Japanese society. When a woman married, she became part of her husband's ie, and her place in the hierarchy was essentially at the bottom. A woman was expected to be obedient to her husband in all things, but also to her new parents-in-law. Women were to be homemakers and child-rearers, and nothing else. Economic reality meant that women would often end up in the workforce, but their first duty was always to the ie. Raising children was a vital aspect of preserving the ie. Women took a leading role in the education of children at first, although they lost this role in the late 19th and early 20th century with the rise of Japan's public school system. Over 90% of children were enrolled in school by 1910, leaving many women to turn to employment to fill their time and contribute to their family. Of course, children required couples to have sex first. Sex within marriage was an obligation. After all, the point of marriage was to produce children. Like in many cultures, male and female sexual behavior was expected to be different. Many men, perhaps most, would have concubines or make use of prostitutes while married. Sex for pleasure and sex for procreation were not seen as the same thing, and there was little demand for a man to seek both exclusively with their wife. By contrast, female chastity was paramount. This was rooted in the issue of legitimacy for children. A man's illegitimate child could be adopted into the family as an heir, but if a woman conceived with another man, that child could never be legitimate. As a result, adultery by a woman was a serious issue. Being caught merely talking to another man could lead to punishment for a wife. Until 1908, it was technically legal for men to kill their wives if they were caught having an affair. After 1908, it was still grounds for divorce and a point of great shame for the woman. Divorce demonstrated the power imbalance of an Imperial Japanese marriage. A man could get a divorce by simply writing a letter called a mekodarian, meaning 3.5 lines, which refers to the incredibly brief length of most of these divorce letters. For all the effort to make the marriages, having it ended in 3 and a bit lines must have been especially cruel. At the start of this period, a man could divorce his wife for any of 7 reasons, all of them treated as faults of the wife. These were sterility, adultery, disapproval from in-laws, laziness, theft, jealousy, sickness. One thing that isn't on that list is falling out of love. As we have said, love was not a key part of marriage. In fact, when one Japanese legislator attempted to have falling out of love added as a reason for divorce in 1908, he was voted down. Meanwhile, a woman could only divorce her husband if he abandoned her, was imprisoned, or if he went insane. Even then, she needed to petition the court in the company of a male relative, such as a father or older brother. Divorce laws were reformed in 1898, establishing the principle of mutual consent for divorce. But whether women had the practical power to disagree with their husbands on the issue is up for debate. If a divorce was granted, both parties could remarry. However, children always remained with the man's heir. It was a moderate improvement in women's rights, but it was a long way from true equality. Although divorce became easier, divorce rates actually declined throughout the imperial period. Historians debate over the exact reason for this, but one explanation might be the rise of state education systems which taught conservative family values and stressed the importance of a strong family and a strong nation, which made divorce increasingly unthinkable to new generations. Of course, outside of marriage, there is plenty to be said about sex and lovemaking in Imperial Japan. Pre-Imperial Japan was a remarkably open and sexually permissive society. Far from the strict sexual rules in places like Europe or the Islamic world, Japanese society was more accepting of things like homosexuality, premarital sex, and prostitution. In fact, it was the spread of Western ideas about sexual propriety and eugenics that was largely behind changing attitudes to sexual behavior. Prostitution was one such practice that was affected. Prostitution was an old and established trade in Japan, but it faced growing opposition in this period. Married men regularly sought their sexual pleasure under prostitutes, and it was not particularly frowned upon for fathers to sell their daughters to brothels in times of hardship. But in 1912, social conservatives launched national campaigns against prostitution and its potential to cause social disorder. However, prostitution was so ingrained that any hopes of outlawing it completely rang hollow. In fact, prostitution increased in the Meiji period. Instead, the government sought to regulate it by setting legal limits on the working conditions of prostitutes and declaring unregulated prostitution illegal. This might have made prostitution safer and easier, but it also made it taxable, which probably explains why the government didn't do much else to ban it. It is here that we must briefly discuss one of the most infamous sexual episodes of Imperial Japan, the comfort women. These were women and girls who were raped and sexually assaulted by Japanese soldiers in occupied territories throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Originally, the government attempted to set up brothels for soldiers to reduce instances of rape, but these institutions had the complete opposite effect. They effectively institutionalized a horrific system of sexual exploitation and abuse. The comfort women are one of the darkest parts of the story of Imperial Japan. If you wish to learn more about this horrendous system, check out our recent video on the topic. Homosexuality was another target of imperial legislation. Attitudes towards male homosexuality had been accepting for centuries in Japan, in one form or another. The Japanese term nanshoku referred to male-on-male sexual activity and was commonly seen in pre-imperial literature. Homosexual behavior was also widely practiced among the samurai class, although much like the ancient Greeks, it was usually between older men and younger boys. One famous pairing that was popular in nanshoku literature was of the warlord Oda Nobunaga, 1534 to 1582, and his confidant Mori Ranmaru. Historians aren't sure whether the relationship was sexual, but it was usually assumed to be in later poems, novels, and plays, and similar behavior among other samurai suggests it is most likely true. It is widely believed that Western notions of sexual propriety lay behind the imperial suppression of homosexuality in Japan. Same-sex relations did not strengthen the nation by providing new children, and Western beliefs that homosexuality would lead to effeminacy persuaded the government to try restricting homosexual acts. Anti-sodomy laws were passed in 1872. However, they were generally ineffective, and they failed to bring about much change. They were repealed in 1880, but although mostly legal, homosexuality was discouraged culturally and socially as being counter to the imperial project. Another form of sexual behavior that the state attempted to control was incest. Like much of the pre-modern world, incestuous marriages, usually between cousins, was common in Japan before the Meiji Restoration. It was so common that some villages were called ketsukozu kekonburaku, blood marriage hamlets, because of the high rate of incestuous marriages. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, scientific understanding of incest persuaded the Japanese government to move against the practice. Incest could lead to health problems for children, which would not contribute to the health of the nation, so they had to be controlled. The state used several methods to discourage these unions, although they were never banned outright. One method was the hosting of hygiene exhibitions in major cities that had exhibits describing the dangers of inbreeding and illegitimacy. Incestuous marriages were never completely rooted out though, and even in 1940, as many as 5% were between relatives, most of them between first cousins. The imperial age might be long gone, but the legacy of that period continues to show in modern Japanese society. In 1999, about half of all weddings were Shinto ceremonies, and divorce laws have continued the imperial trend of becoming fairer to women. But on the other hand, attitudes to homosexuality in modern Japan aren't as accepting as they were before the imperial age. Today, Japan is facing a low birth rate and declining marriage rates. Once again, the government has taken an interest in the love lives of its citizens. How marriage and love will look in Japan's future is anyone's guess. If you enjoyed this video and want to show your love for the channel, please like and subscribe and check out our other videos too.